Damas y caballeros, a nombre de la Universidad Internacional, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a la ceremonia de investidura de doctor honoris causa al doctor Stephen D. Krashen. Doy la bienvenida al claustro académico de la Universidad Internacional. Cedo el micrófono al rector de la Universidad Internacional y presidente del claustro académico, doctor Francisco Javier Espinosa Romero.
Acto primero, recepción. Buenas tardes. Sean ustedes bienvenidos a la 32ª reunión del claustro académico universitario para sesionar bajo la siguiente orden. 1. Pase de lista del claustro académico universitario. Preside el claustro, su servidor, decano presidente, Francisco Javier Espinosa Romero. Decano José Manuel Muñoz Gómez.
Presente, su señoría.
Decano Rodolfo Ricaño Uribe.
Presente, su señoría.
Decano Francisco Javier Espinosa Olalde.
Presente, su señoría.
Decano Álvaro Vergara Villanueva.
Presente, su señoría.
Decano José Adalberto Gama Arroyo.
Presente, su señoría.
Decana Mari Carmen Hernández Gatica.
Presente, su señoría.
Decana Gail Friedler Bierma.
Presente, su señoría.
Decano Álvaro Ramírez Rivera.
Presente, su señoría.
Estando presentes todos los miembros, declaro la apertura de la sesión y propongo como decano secretario a Rodolfo Ricaño Uribe. Si están de acuerdo los miembros del claustro académico universitario, sírvanse levantar su mano derecha.
Acepto, su señoría. 2.
Solicito al claustro universitario integre la comitiva de recepción para la investidura de doctor honoris causa, que debe estar integrada por un decano que fungirá como padrino del candidato, un decano de recepción, un decano testigo de la sociedad, un decano representante del patronato de la Universidad Internacional, quienes le revestirán con el traje académico, y asimismo solicito se haga la propuesta de los decanos antes mencionados.
Señor decano presidente, se propone como padrino del candidato al decano Álvaro Ramírez Rivera, como decano de recepción al decano Álvaro Vergara Villanueva, como testigo de la sociedad a la decana Gail Fielder Vierna, como representante del patronato de la Universidad Internacional al decano José Manuel Muñoz Gómez.
Gracias, decano secretario. Si están de acuerdo los miembros del claustro universitario, sírvanse levantar su mano derecha. Aprobado entonces.
3.
Solicito al secretario decano Rodolfo Ricaño Uribe proceda con el juramento en voz alta en representación de sus compañeros.
Su señoría, pido la venia.
Concedida.
Ego juro deum et crucem per me corporaliter, tactan a chakra dei evangelia. Domino rectori fidelis et obediens ero, honorem et reverentiam, huius almae universitates omnique, et singulorum. De aci quapat vita mi comes fueri, pro viribus procurabo ac defendam, sic me Deus adiubet et aec santa Dei evangelia. Acto segundo, presentación. 4.
Solicito al decano Álvaro Vergara Villanueva dé lectura al acta de nombramiento como doctor honoris causa por la Universidad Internacional al candidato Stephen D. Krashen.
Su señoría, pido su venia.
Concedida.
Universidad Internacional. Resolución 29 de julio de 2021, por la cual la Universidad Internacional confiere el doctorado honoris causa al doctor Stephen Krashen, Colegio Académico de la Rectoría, considerando, número 1, que es función del Colegio Académico de la Rectoría de la Universidad Internacional conceder el doctorado honoris causa a personalidades nacionales y extranjeras que hayan destacado en el ámbito académico y de otra índole por la ejecución de una obra de reconocidos méritos, o a personalidades que hayan realizado una gestión de evidentes y grandes beneficios para la comunidad y la unión entre los pueblos. Que el Colegio Académico de la Rectoría, en su sesión del 29 de julio del año en curso, consideró la candidatura de Stephen Krashen, número 2, por su labor y contribución para todo el mundo, estableciendo las bases teóricas de la enseñanza e investigación de segundas lenguas modernas. Su huella en este campo es inconmensurable. Número 3, que Stephen Krashen, siendo autor y coautor de casi 500 artículos, más de 10 libros y actualmente continúa publicando. Su trabajo fundamental, adquisición de un segundo idioma y aprendizaje de un segundo idioma, ha impactado a 2 generaciones de educadores en las aulas de todos los niveles. Su influencia es evidente en todos los lugares del mundo en los que se ofrecen cursos de idiomas extranjeros y de segunda lengua. Actualmente, sigue siendo una figura relevante en su campo y continúa en su investigación sobre el papel de la lectura en su búsqueda para ayudar a los estudiantes a adquirir competencia en un segundo idioma. El profesor emérito de la Universidad del Sur de California, con un PhD en lingüística en 1972, resuelve, artículo 1, conferir el doctorado honoris causa de la Universidad Internacional a Stephen David Krashen. Artículo número 2. La presente resolución rige a partir de la fecha de su expedición. Comuníquese y cúmplase. Otorgado en Cuernavaca, Morelos, México, a los 29 días del mes de julio 2021. Firma, doctor Francisco Javier Espinosa Romero, rector de la Universidad Internacional, y el doctor Rodolfo Ricaño Uribe, vicerrector de la Universidad Internacional.
Acto tercero. Elogio y petición. 5.
Solicito a la decana Gail Friedlet Bierma presente los méritos del candidato.
Su señoría, pido su venia.
Concedida.
Stephen Krashen earned his PhD at UCLA in 1972 and began his career as a professor at the University of Southern California in the Department of Linguistics, where he established the theoretical foundation of modern-day second language teaching and research. His imprint on the field is immeasurable. He has authored or co-authored nearly 500 articles, more than 10 books, and continues to publish actively. His seminal work, Second Language Acquisition and Second Language Learning, has impacted 2 generations of educators in classrooms at all levels. His influence is evident wherever foreign and second language courses are offered throughout the world. Dr. Krashen remains a relevant figure in his field and continues his research on the role of reading in his quest to help students acquire proficiency in second languages. For all his work, efforts, and love of languages, the Universidad Internacional bestows upon him the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa.
Como padrino, Pido el grado de doctor honoris causa para Stephen D. Krashen.
¿Están de acuerdo en otorgar el doctorado honoris causa al candidato Stephen D. Krashen? Decano José Manuel Muñoz Gómez. Decano Rodolfo Ricaño Uribe.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Decano Francisco Javier Espinosa Olalde.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Decano Álvaro Vergara Villanueva.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Decano José Alberto Gama Arroyo.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Decana Mari Carmen Hernández Gatica.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Decana Gail Friedel Pierma.
Otorgado, su señoría.
Otorgado entonces.
Siete.
Procedo a la solemne investidura simbólica del grado de doctor honoris causa al candidato Stephen D. Krashen.
Acto cuarto. Concesión. 8.
Por la facultad que me confiere el Estatuto de la Universidad Internacional, otorgo el grado de doctor honoris causa y como símbolo de tal honor le impongo este birrete. El cual corona sus estudios y méritos, para que con él no solo sobresalga ante los demás con dignidad, sino que también, con el yelmo de Minerva, esté protegido para la lucha.
Acto quinto. Investidura. 9.
He aquí el libro abierto para que conozca los secretos de las ciencias y su sabiduría. Helo aquí cerrado para que dichos secretos, según convenga, los guarde en lo profundo de su corazón. Reciba estos guantes blancos como símbolo de la fortaleza que sus manos han de conservar y también como signo de su altísima dignidad.
Acto sexto. Protesta. 10.
A continuación, el decano José Alberto Gama Arroyo tomará protesta al nuevo doctor.
Su señoría, pido su venia.
Concedida.
Ante los académicos presentes y los representantes de nuestra sociedad, protesta siempre y donde quiera que estuviese, guardar los derechos y privilegios y el honor de esta universidad y siempre ayudar, prestar apoyo y consejo en las obras y asuntos de la misma, cuantas veces fuese requerido, así como mantener su compromiso con la ciencia.
Dr. Krashen, you have to say, si protesto.
You're muted.
Your mic.
Course. Okay, now what?
Si protesto, you have to say.
Sí proceso. Sí protesto.
Recibo su promesa. La Universidad Internacional es testigo y será juez si faltase a su compromiso.
Acto séptimo. Congratulatoria. 11.
Estimado decano Stephen D. Krashen, le admito e incorporo como doctor a la Universidad Internacional, con todos los honores, libertades, exenciones y privilegios de que gozan y puedan gozar los demás doctores en cualquier parte del orbe.
Acto octavo. Agradecimiento. 12.
It's for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Su señora pido su venia para pronunciar un discurso.
Tiene la palabra el doctor honoris causa Stephen D. Krashen, concedida.
Okay. Discurso. And now I say a few things.
You can thank them now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would like, of course, to thank people who are here at the university. This is a very, very high honor. I would like to thank my colleagues, present, past, and future. And among my colleagues, of course, is Professor Gail Vierma, who I renewed my acquaintance with the other day, and we're looking forward to more and more wonderful work together. I would also like to thank a shepherd who hundreds, thousands of years ago was watching his goats in a field in Ethiopia. And he noticed something, that the goats started eating a bean on the ground, and they suddenly became very happy. They suddenly became very lively and started dancing around. That shepherd changed my life because he discovered coffee, the secret of life for me. I've had wonderful coffee in Cuernavaca, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. I call it the secreto de éxito, okay? So thanks to all my friends, thanks to colleagues, present, past, and future, and thanks again to the wonderful magic liquid. Thank you.
Listo. Acto noveno. Cierre. 13.
Habiendo concluido todos los puntos del orden, se levanta la sesión.
En este momento queda plasmado en el libro de registro institucional de doctorados honoris causa de la Universidad Internacional.
Beautiful.
Agradecemos a todos los presentes por su atención y su asistencia y vamos a continuar con la conferencia magistral del doctor honoris causa Stephen David Krashen. ¿Cómo alcanzar los niveles más altos de competencia en primeras y segundas lenguas? Lectura placentera autoseleccionada. Invito al claustro académico a acompañarnos en esta magistral conferencia.
Okay.
Adelante, doctor Stephen.
Thank you very much. It is a very high honor to be here, and I'm delighted to talk to you about our exciting work. This has been a good time for me, and I would like to tell you about it. During the pandemic, I have been home. It has been the best, most productive period of my life. I've been alone in the house with my novia. What could be sweeter? My novia and I have only been married for 55 years, so it's still wonderful. I've been working every day, and the work has been, I don't think I ever want to go outside again. It's that good, okay? Stay home, drink coffee, and be with my friend, my wife, my girlfriend. It's a perfect combination. So I want to tell you about what I've been doing. I've been working with my languages. As you have noticed, my Spanish is not very good, and I've been trying to improve it. I want to tell you what I've been doing. And by telling you this, I'm going to give the entire speech in the next 5 minutes. Okay? You don't have to listen to the rest. Here where I live in the suburb of Los Angeles, we have a supermarket. The supermarket is open to old people only every Friday morning at 6 o'clock. And I have been going there every Friday morning at 6 o'clock to do shopping with the other old people because it's less dangerous. The first day I was there, I bought my food, I had it ready to check out, I put it down, and the man who helped me, I noticed his name was Fidel. So I assumed he was from Mexico. So I spoke Spanish to him, my terrible Spanish. Of course, he answered in English. That's what you're supposed to do. And I said, Fidel, tú puedes ayudarme. Mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. Por favor, hablamos español. He loved it because he was on my side. He could help me. After that day, every Friday for the next year, I made sure I found Fidel and I brought my groceries to him. Now, I tell you, my Spanish, it's bad now, but it was worse a year ago. He has helped me enormously. We've been talking once a week, not for very long, maybe 2 minutes. My Spanish is much better. When I meet old friends and I speak Spanish to them, they say, Steve, your Spanish is so much better. What's going on? It's not from talking to Fidel, because we only have 30 seconds, 45 seconds. He has to work. He can't sit and talk to me. But I've been going home and I've been reading, which is the subject of my speech today. I have been reading what we call graded readers. I want to talk to you today about graded readers. It's going to make our lives much better. Here's one of them. It's one of my favorites. The author Adriana Ramirez sent me this one, Me Perdí en Medellín. It's a wonderful story because it is captivating. Graded readers are becoming literature. That's the point. This is a revolution in our field. I want to tell you about this book. I want to tell you the story. It's about a young man from the United States who comes to Medellin just as a tourist, but his Spanish is not very good. It's like mine. He's in his second year of Spanish, and he's going to meet a friend, but he gets lost. He finds another young man. He says to him in his poor Spanish, "Can you help me? I'm lost." The friend says, "Where are you going?" He tells him, "Come with me. I'll take you there." So they begin to walk, and they meet 3 young ladies, 3 beautiful young ladies. The story's getting interesting already. The young lady come up to his new friend. They give him hugs. They give him kisses on the cheek. They hold his hand. What's going on here? Then his new friend introduces the hero of the story. They go up to him. They hold his hand. They give him hugs too. Then, of course, they say goodbye. They go on their way. The boys talk to each other. The helper says, "You're wondering what's going on here. 2 of these girls are my cousins. I have known them since I was 3 years old. The other one is a good friend of theirs. There's nothing happening. There's no romance. This is how we are in Medellin. This is our culture. It's just being friendly." The whole book is anecdote after anecdote, teaching culture in a beautiful way. All the books by this author are like that, and I'm finding other books like this. So I'm finally slowly reaching the point where I can read real Spanish, which is my goal, but it takes a lot of these. It takes 30, 40, 50, 60 of them reading for enjoyment. I have given you my lecture now. This is really my message, but I'm going to repeat it in much more boring language, okay, and be a respectable scholar. I want to review for you what we have learned over the last 45 years. L'chaim. Now, L'chaim is my second best language, okay? After that, German, French, Spanish down the list, okay? So cheers. Hebrew. Anyway, let me review for you what we've learned. The first hypothesis, some of you know about, we call acquisition learning. We think people have two ways of getting better in language. You can acquire language, you can learn it, and that's different. Acquisition is subconscious. While it's happening, you don't know it's happening. After you've acquired something, you don't know that it's there. It's represented in your mind subconsciously. This is all very mystical. The other process we call learning. Learning is what we do in school. Conscious knowledge, knowing about language. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. This is the difference between ser and estar, and you're supposed to learn these rules, etc. We are very good at language acquisition. We are wonderful at it. We are very bad at language learning. This has been the problem of our profession. The brain is bad at language learning. We do it very poorly. The next hypothesis we call the natural order hypothesis, and this kept us very busy in the 1970s and 1980s. We discovered that some rules are acquired very early, first language and second. Some are acquired in the middle, some are acquired late. In English, the progressive, John is playing the violin, that's early. The third person singular, you all know this if you've taught English, is very late. There could be a long time between the two. Now, the third person singular seems very easy, but it's very, very late. We'll come back to that. This kept us very busy, and I had this great idea in 1981. I thought this was going to make me famous, help people. Turned out I was wrong. I had this idea. Tell us the natural order, and we'll teach along the natural order. We'll teach the present progressive early. We'll teach the third person singular late. It turns out I was completely wrong. The natural order is not the teaching syllabus. We'll come to that later in a moment. Now let's talk about grammar. Well, people have said some things about me that aren't true, and I want to make corrections. They've said things like, Krashen says, never teach grammar. Grammar is evil. Grammar is wrong. Teach grammar, go to jail. Well, no, that's not my opinion. It's okay to teach a little grammar sometimes. My real opinion is it's very hard to teach grammar. It's hard to understand it. It's hard to learn it. It's hard to think of the rules and hard to apply it. So the natural order hypothesis, as you see, does not mean go from simple to complex, and it's not the syllabus. Here's the problem with grammar. We can only use grammar when some conditions have been met, and these conditions are very hard to meet. 3 conditions, they are necessary. You know, it's really interesting to be an intermediate like I am in Spanish and to try to speak it. You learn so many things about theory and teaching this way. So this is also agrees with my experiences. First of all, you can't learn the rules. You can't learn all the rules. There are too many. They are too complicated, and we don't even know them. If you ask the greatest linguist in the world, now you know who he is, it's Noam Chomsky. He's the #1 linguist of all time. He tells you he doesn't know all the rules. His students, his colleagues don't know all the rules. We haven't discovered them yet. How can we teach it if we don't even know them? Even the best language teachers don't know all the rules, the ones who love grammar the most. The best students don't understand the rules when we explain them. They don't remember the rules. So we're talking about a tiny, tiny part of the language. Another thing, let's say you've learned the rules. That's not enough. You've got to be thinking about the rules when you're speaking. That is very unnatural. It's hard to have a conversation and think about grammar. It's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. It's very difficult. I'll tell you what happens. If you're very worried about grammar, and it's time for you to confess to me that this is what you do, you think about your next sentence, you plan it while the other person is talking. You can't do that. You say something that's grammatically perfect, but you weren't listening. And what you say doesn't make sense anymore. So these conditions, if you want to use grammar in the flow of conversation, it is nearly impossible to do. Don't worry about it. And don't worry about your mistakes. I want to tell you what I've learned from a friend of mine. His name is Steve Kaufman. Steve Kaufman speaks, I think, about 20 languages. I've been with him, watching him speak these languages. He's really good, no question. He says, don't worry about mistakes. Nobody cares. Only your worst teacher cares. Real people don't care. They're more interested in what you are saying. Okay, now when are these conditions met? When are they met? When you know the rule, you're thinking about grammar, and you have time. They're met when you take a grammar test. How about that? And even then, we don't use grammar very much. So it's kind of hopeless. My opinion is, if students want to learn about the rule, fine. Let them look at a grammar book that you have in the back of the class, or what one of my colleagues did. She had a special period of time. This period of time, if you have questions on grammar, ask them. I asked her later, how many questions did you get when you asked people, can you give them permission to ask about grammar? She said, sometimes 2. 2 every period? No, 2 every semester. People say they care, but they really don't. They're more interested in real communication. Okay, now we get to the main part. If it's not grammar, how do we acquire language? How does it happen? I want to illustrate this by giving you a language lesson. And I'm going to use a language that some of you have studied. Maybe 1 or 2 of you can actually speak. I'll give you 2 lessons, and you can tell me which one is better. Lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte Ihnen voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? You think if I talked to you like that, you would acquire German? How about if I repeated it? Would that help? No. How about if I said it louder? No. How about if I said it slower? That was actually very, very slow. How about if I said it and you repeated it? No. How about if I wrote it on the board and you wrote it down? Nothing. None of those things help. None of those things matter. And these are the things we do in language classes all the time. We acquire language in one way, and this is now the most important part of my presentation. We acquire language when we understand it. That's all. That's it. When we understand what we read, or we understand what someone tells us, we are acquiring the language. Here's language lesson number 2. Das, you have to look at me. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf, ja? Ist gut, ja. Hier sind meine Ohren. Ohren. Verstehen Sie das? Ohren, ja? Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. Und hier sind meine Augen. Augen. Ich habe 2 Augen. 1, 2. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Ja, ich habe eine Zigarette. Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood what I just said, even a little bit, you acquired a little bit of German. Let me tell you what's amazing about this. You acquired a little bit of German. Two facts that I think are astonishing. Number one, you acquired German without any work, no effort. All you had to do was watch me make a few silly jokes in German, and you acquired it. Number two, language acquisition is involuntary. Like it or not, you all acquired a little bit of German. That is fantastic, in my opinion. No effort, folks. Now, a colleague of mine, name is Leonard Newmark. Leonard, I'll tell you what he said, and then an interesting story, I think. Leonard Newmark said, if we want people to acquire language in our classes, what we tell them has to be interesting. Amazing. I want to push this even farther. Not only interesting, I think it has to be very interesting. The word I like is compelling. Compelling means so interesting, you forget that it's in another language. I want all of our classes, beginning, intermediate, to be interesting. Now, I want to tell you about Leonard Newmark, a little coincidence. He is a professor, or was, at the University of California at San Diego. And my aunt and uncle, Boris and Ann Newmark, lived very close to me. And they had a party, 50th wedding anniversary, and it was in the local synagogue. So, of course, my wife and I and our kids, we went to the party. I walk in the door, who's there? Leonard Newmark. This man with a similar idea as mine. I quoted him all the time. We respected each other. He said, Steve, what are you doing here? I said, Leonard, what are you doing here? He said, it's the 50th anniversary of my aunt and uncle. I said, no, it's the 50th anniversary of my aunt and uncle. We share an aunt and an uncle. My Aunt Anne married his Uncle Boris. So that's very mystical, right? A lot of coincidences. So the message is, it's got to be extremely interesting. We acquire by input, not by output. The ability to speak a language or write a language is the result of getting comprehensible input. That's why my speaking to Fidel didn't count very much or at all. What he said to me helped a little bit, but I really made progress from these books. That's where it happened, from the input. The ability to speak and to write is the result of getting comprehensible input. Having people speak more, making your students speak more will not help their speaking. Having them write more will not help their writing. My Spanish has problems, I know that. I need more input. I need more listening and speaking, okay? That's the moral of the story. I've also found out that forcing people to speak before they're ready is very painful. I wrote a paper about this called Down with Forced Speech. Forced speech means making people talk before they're ready. I got the idea from my daughter. My daughter is now 51 years old. Can you imagine? Oh my, she's wonderful. And at the time of the story, she was 5 years old, and she was going to play with the child of a neighbor. The neighbor had a daughter, also 5 years old. So I brought my daughter, Deborah, to their house, and the two girls started to play. And I was supposed to come back in 1 hour to pick her up and bring both girls to my house. Very nice. Now, I have to tell you in advance, I knew these children very well, and I knew the mother very well. We were close family friends, okay? So the mom went into the kitchen and said, before I leave, I have to take a pill. She went running into the kitchen, got a glass of water, took the pill. We're good friends, so I could ask her. I said, what was that? Valium, anti-anxiety medication. So again, we were good friends. I said, why are you taking Valium? She was on her way to Santa Monica Community College taking Spanish class. It's my Spanish class. It makes me so nervous. The expression she used, it freaks me out. So I was still the researcher then. And I said, why does Spanish class make you so nervous? When the teacher calls on me, or I have to give a report in class. I immediately went home, looked at the research, and I found everybody was saying this. One of my colleagues wrote a paper in his beginning French class. He did a survey. Speaking was the highest anxiety-provoking activity. Another person said the highest source of anxiety is having to speak before you're ready. Forced speech is the problem. I want to give you some other data that supports this. An anthropologist named Sorensen did some wonderful research in the Valpes River in Brazil and Colombia, near the border. In this small area, 10,000 people lived. Now, that's not a lot of people. If you go to a football game and there's only 10,000 people watching, that's not a lot, okay? This group had a very interesting rule. You could not marry anybody who spoke your language. They thought people like us were disgusting, okay? My wife, when I met her, she was an English speaker, of course, so they would have found that unacceptable, okay? So the children in this group were always acquiring languages. The child would acquire mommy's language and daddy's language. All the children would. They would acquire the language of the small group, then the larger group, and eventually the lingua franca of the entire group. So they were doing language acquisition their whole lives all the time. Professor Sorensen knew this was a good research opportunity. And he interviewed them. How do they do it? They were very good at it. All of them spoke many languages, and they were constantly adding languages their entire lives. How did they do it? Beautiful. He said they don't practice speaking a language they don't know well. They don't practice speaking. Wonderful. They may make an occasional attempt to speak a new language, but it doesn't come easily. They will not force it. They let it just emerge. To acquire a new language fluently, 1 to 2 years, and I have seen this number over and over again when we talk about natural acquisition. When I was a student studying how to be an English teacher, we all read the work of a man named Eugene Nida. Some of you have heard of him. A wonderful thinker. And in one of his books, published in 1957, okay, he says he did a study he was in Africa, and he visited and talked to a number of Africans who spoke many languages. And they acquired them by going to neighboring countries, neighboring areas, and interacting with the people, working with them side by side in their jobs, etc. Here's the best thing. Instead of trying hard to learn the language, they seemed to just take it for granted. After listening to the language long enough, they could find that they could hear it. That means they could understand it. Steve Kaufman says the exact same thing. And he didn't get it from Eugene Nida. He got it from his own experience. His advice, assume that you were born to acquire language, that it will come. It's going to happen. Take it for granted that you will succeed. That is powerful, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful. And do what these people did. Just listen. Before you know it, you will hear what other people are saying. So the input has to be interesting. It has to be compelling. And there has to be, of course, a lot of it. Another point before I give you the application. Language acquisition is gradual. It's a little bit at a time. We don't give the student a new word on Monday and expect him to know the word on Friday for a test. That's not how it happens in the real world. Brilliant researchers from the University of Illinois have discovered this in first language, and many people, including myself, have confirmed this for second language. If you hear a new word and it's in context, you get a little bit each time, maybe 5%. Each time you hear it, a little more. For example, in the German lesson I gave you, you heard and understood the word for Augen. You heard and understood the word for ears, Ohren. You couldn't repeat it right away, but the next time you hear it, you get a little more, and gradually it is fully acquired. And his data, I think, is very good defending this, okay? Context is the magic way we acquire language. Now, we are warned against context. I'll tell you what's going on here. People say, well, if you hear it in context, you're not sure of the meaning. Context may fool you. It may push you in the wrong direction. Not very often. The example I like is this one. Let's say the target word is finger, and the student sees a picture of a man, you can see me, right? Holding up his hand and a finger. Now, you don't know if this means over there. You don't know if this means finger, thumb, or hand. You don't know. But most contexts, according to the research, are helpful. Very few contexts push you in the wrong direction. Most contexts give you pretty good clues. In one study, 61% of the context were helpful. About 30% didn't matter. 8% were actually pushing you in the wrong direction. It has to work. Otherwise, nobody would acquire language. This is the way it happens all the time. Our job as language teachers, provide language in context, of course. I want to present our hypothesis about language acquisition, and I'll get to the main point and come to the same conclusion Professor Vierma came to, which I think is the exciting one today. Stories. 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 Let me repeat that. Stories. Secreto de éxito, stories, always. I realized this for the first time about 10 years ago. I live about 50 kilometers from Santa Monica, outside of the city of Los Angeles. And I would go into the city at least 3 times a week, drive there to do 2 things. Number one, my nietos live in Santa Monica, and I'm still addicted to my nietos. Oh my goodness. It's as though you understand, okay? So I'd go in to see them, play with them, take them to the park. It was wonderful. The other reason, and you can tell by looking at me, was to go to Gold's Gym, where I could lift weights and talk to Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I did sometimes, okay? I wrote an article about him, in fact, but that's another presentation. That's another story. So I did the drive several times during the week. The drive is boring. It's horrible. Now, in the car, what can you do? You can listen to the radio. So I turned on the news. Most of the news, even then, was conservative, conservative, conservative. And then it became 100% Donald Trump, and that was enough for me. I stopped. I tried listening to music. I am, by the way, a professional musician. Let me tell you about it. I play the piano. So in synagogue once, or synagogue sometimes, I played the piano during the services. One time I played the piano during a bar mitzvah ceremony for girls. The mommy and daddy were so happy, they were going to give me $50. I took it and I gave it to the synagogue, but I can now say I'm a paid professional, okay? So I like listening to the music on the radio, but what they did, they took all the good songs and they put it on a pay per listen station. So the stuff you get on the regular radio is horrible. They want you to pay. So I started, what did I do? I started listening to stories. I went to the 2 local libraries, both near my house, and I took out books on tape, books on CD. Now, here's the great thing. The books were all in English, nothing in other languages, but okay. Also, there were no classics. Now, I am a famous college professor. I can't just listen to anything. What would people think? I had no choice. I listened to bestsellers. I listened to popular books. I listened to novels about lawyers, John Grisham. I heard medical stories. I listened to detective novels. Yes, I listened to romances. I listened to historical novels, bestseller after bestseller. Guess what? They're good. Most of them are really good. Not all, a few occasionally bad ones. But the first one I listened to, you know what it is. Of course, it was Harry Potter. It was wonderful. What happened to me is what's happened to you. You come home, you're listening to the story of Harry Potter at Hogwarts with his 2 friends, and you stay in the car to hear the end of the chapter. Isn't that true? All the time. It was that Harry Potter was brilliant. It's all about education. J.K. Rowling understands education as well as anybody in the world. It's the story of Hogwarts. The headmaster, Dumbledore, becomes a hero in the story. Harry Potter's in good classes, bad classes. His friend Hermione is the best student. I talked about Harry Potter in my course at the university, and one of my students wrote a paper about Harry Potter. It was brilliant. The title of the paper is Hermione Smart? Perfect question. Is this intelligence, what she's showing in class? So Harry Potter was wonderful. After that, I went to other novels. I finally found my way into the detective stories, etc. They were very good. All of them. These authors are brilliant. When I go to conferences on children's literature, I always wait and I attend the talks of the authors of children's books. They are amazing people. They understand things. So the conclusion I came to, the core of our program, we might consider stories. I want to give you a 3-step hypothesis. I'll call this the conduit hypothesis. Now, you have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's good, because the secret of new terminology is to invent terms that nobody understands. Then people think you're much smarter than they are. So that's what I'm trying to do. Actually, it's a simple idea. The conduit hypothesis is this. A conduit means a passageway from one stage to the next stage. Very simple idea. We go in stages and each one leads to the next. The first stage is stories told by the teacher to the student. The best methods today, the beginning stage, is heavy with stories. And I think this is very, very good. I want to tell you about one of them. Oh, by the way, students love this. If you look at the literature on first language, you ask kids if they like to be read to, they all do. I'd say 90% like to be read to. The ones who don't are the ones whose parents don't like to read to them. And there's nothing like it, those of you parents, how pleasurable it is to tell stories, read stories to kids. Anyway, the method I'm going to describe to you is one of several that uses stories. I think this one works very well. My colleague developed it. It's called, it's called story listening, invented by Beniko Mason from Japan. Here's how it works. She selects stories from books stories that she says have stood the test of time, known stories that we all know to be good, so the students are going to like them. She likes to select from Grimm's fairy tales. And you know it's going to be interesting, it's going to be a winner, but you can select your own, things that you like, Has to be something you like. The teacher prepares the story depending on the level of the student. You find the words, she finds the words that she knows the students may have trouble with, where the context may not be enough. She draws a picture. She prepares to draw a picture. She occasionally, she does this in Japan, the university there, she'll give a quick translation in Japanese, a quick word, but mostly it's the context that does it. We have done a few experiments with this. She's done one kind of experiment where she'll tell a story where there are words in it she knows the students don't know, and she's helped them out. Then 10 days later, she'll give them a test to see how much they've retained. She compares that to another treatment where she does the same thing and she gives them extra vocabulary instruction, traditional instruction. Draw a line from the word to the definition, write 3 sentences with every word. Guess what? The story is much more efficient. You acquire more words per minute from stories, far more than doing vocabulary drills. So we tell our students, our teachers now, don't do vocabulary exercises. Tell another story. Well, teachers get worried. They say, well, what if the words don't come back? Guess what? They'll come back. They always do. People are worried, well, we have to emphasize the frequent words. Let me tell you a secret. Frequent words are frequent. That's why we call them frequent words. They're going to come back because they're frequent. If the word doesn't come back, you probably didn't need it anyway, and you'll get it much, much later, if at all. So this is a perfect method. Students take these classes not one semester, 2 or 3 semesters. They don't read one story. They read 10, 20, they hear 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 stories. Then it works. Then you're going to get an effect. So the first semester, we hear stories. That's the beginning method. This moves you along to stage 2. Stage 2 is reading. Dr. Mason has invented a method called guided self-selected reading, which is the stage I'm in right now. I'm gradually emerging from this stage. I've managed to read one real book in Spanish. Of course, it was Allende, of course, and it was spelled Allende, it was Zorro. It was too hard, but it was so good. I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next. It was more than compelling. I'm going to go on an Isabel Allende campaign as soon as I'm ready for it. This is wonderful. Narrow reading is the answer, no question. You keep reading the books you like, all the words are going to be there. I'll come back to that. Anyway, the student reads graded readers. In the beginning, the teacher helps the student find the graded readers. A graded reader that's right for their interests and that they may want to read more of. The students don't have to select it. They don't have to finish the book if they don't want to. Self-selected voluntary reading. Now I'll tell you something that will make you jealous. I can't help it. Her library at her university had 5,000 graded readers in English for her students in Japan. That's what we're talking about. Do the math. How many computers? Not that many. We're so eager to throw away our money on useless technology rather than do the obvious. Also, yes, I'm in favor of books on PDF, of course, books to download, et cetera, et cetera. So let's do that. Gradually, after they're in this program for a while, they go up to reading. When they reach authentic reading, they don't need us anymore. It's over. The stories we can help them with, helping them select books, guided self-selected reading, we can help them with. When they can make their own selections, our job is done. That's our goal. The goal of education in general is to make students independent of us. That's the idea. We can reach this in reading in a few semesters, and it's wonderful when it happens. I certainly don't need a German class. I don't need a French class, and I'm just about to the point where I won't need a Spanish. And then you can congratulate me. I still need people to help me select books occasionally, et cetera, here and there. I'm depending on Dr. Villarma to help me with this. But then I'll be on my own, and it's up to me. That's the goal of education. Let me tell you a little bit about the wonderful research on reading. And for me, this is the favorite part of my presentation. We know a lot about reading these days. We know, first of all, that people who read more know more language. They have larger vocabularies. They know more grammar. They write better. And, are you listening, Donald Trump? They spell better. My goodness. All this comes from reading. They're everything. Not only that, people who read more know more. They know more about a lot of things. This is from reading fiction. I'll give you some of the supporting data, but I want to give you this amazing research result. Researchers at the University of Michigan have done research on first language, and I can't wait to see if this is true of second language. The more you read, the more fiction you read, the more you know about history, the more you know about literature, the more you know about science. I have to tell you about my relationship with John Grisham. John Grisham writes novels about law school. My favorite is The Runaway Jury. Then there's The Firm, other books like this. I have a very close relationship with one of my cousins. My cousin Evelyn, who lives in the Chicago area. Evelyn just turned 94 years old. And when she was young, she was the older cousin who was always very nice to me. She and her husband, Marty. She was also my mother's best friend, okay? So I feel very close to Evelyn. We still talk on the phone every so often. She said to me, you know, Stephen, what I'm gonna do now, my cousin, my late husband, Marty, knew a lot about the law, and that really helped us out. I'm gonna find out about the law. I'm gonna go to the school and community college, and I'm going to take a class on law. And I said, Evelyn, don't do that. Try this. Read novels by John Grisham. I sent her novels, which are all tax deductible now because I'm telling you about this. So it's really cheap to do it. She loved it. She's still reading these novels. She said, this is great. She agreed 10 John Grisham novels is like a year of law school. My experience, about 20 years ago, I was put on a jury, and because I'm a college professor, they made me the foreman. Bad decision. I was okay, but after we had some problems. We were a hung jury, and I blame myself. After that, not too long ago, I read The Runaway Jury by John Grisham. If I had read that book 20 years ago, that jury would not have been hung. They would have come to the right decision because I didn't know what to do when a problem came up. I knew what to do after reading that book. These books give you real knowledge. Fiction is magic. There's more about fiction I have to tell you. The recent research on fiction says that fiction will give you desirable habits of mind. People who read fiction gain in empathy. Isn't that interesting? They understand other people better. Here is a Los Angeles radio journalist who said this. She said, if you read a lot, you have experiences, so many experiences with other people. You walk in their shoes. You go through the same experiences they do, and you get a far better understanding of the human race. You meet far more people in novels than you do in real life. Also, if you read more, you realize that the world is complicated. This is what the research says. Simple solutions don't work. You figure that out from reading novels, not from real life. One of my favorite interviews, and I think this is my favorite of all time, was done in a British newspaper. And it was an interview with Barack Obama. And they asked Barack Obama about his reading habits and what reading has done for him. Now, Barack Obama didn't read the same research I did. This is what he said, without my help, okay? He said, when I think about how I understand my role as citizen and as president, the most important stuff I think I've learned from novels. Wow. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with being comfortable with the notion the world is complicated and full of grays, and there's still truth there to be found. It's possible to connect with someone else, even though they're very different from you. The same thing. Noam Chomsky said something very, very similar. It's quite possible, overwhelmingly probable, we'll always learn more about human life and personality from novels than from scientific psychology. I've looked at surveys of what people read. I've looked at the New York Times bestseller list. I've looked at books taken out from libraries. Over 95% fiction. And there's a good reason this is so. This is what they have been telling us. I want to talk about, I want to give you one research study on this because it makes me look good, and then talk about two other topics. This is a study I did with Beniko Mason, and this was about her guided reading area. What we did is we looked at a few of her students, and we took records, students who had been in her program for a long time, anywhere from several months to maybe 3 years. They'd gone through stories, they'd gone through reading, etc. We had a record of what they read. They kept a record for us. From that, we could calculate how many hours they put into reading. We then did statistical magic. We correlated the number of hours read and their scores on a standardized test, the TOEIC test, the most popular test in the world of language. We did listening comprehension, reading comprehension. The more they read, the better they did on the test. We used a test called multiple regression, and we found, well, some of them took classes in test preparation. That didn't matter. Some of them studied vocabulary. That didn't matter. No matter what they did that they thought was good for them, the only thing that really mattered was how much reading they had done. The correlation was 0.94, which is nearly perfect. That's an astonishing result. So this, I think, validates our approach. Other studies say pretty much the same thing. Research also shows that when you compare fiction and nonfiction, fiction always wins when you look at who acquires the most language. I want to talk about two more points. One point is the importance of selecting books yourself. The research does support this. The studies are kind of hard to do because you have to get a good idea of what the assigned reading was like, what self-selected reading was like. Sometimes the selection aren't good. But there's one really good study. My former student, of course, Sian Lee from Taiwan, did a nice, well-controlled study where the assigned reading was pretty good compared to self-selected reading. Self-selected reading did better, okay? More impressive than that is people's comments on what happens when people give them gifts as books as gifts. My favorite comes from Garrison Keillor, another radio personality. Here's what he says. When he was in college, he majored in English. He says, as a former English major, I'm an easy target, a sitting duck for gift books. And in the past few years, I've gotten Dickens, Thackeray, Smollett, Richardson, Emerson, Keats, Boswell, and the Brontes, all of them great. None of them ever read by me. all of them now on my shelf, looking at me and making me feel guilty. I have a shelf that I've dedicated to Garrison Keillor. I have all these books, some of them written by friends of mine. And I fear the day when they'll say, "Oh, Steve, how did you like that book I gave you?" Oh, no. Okay. So gift books are assigned reading. That's the problem. I want to give you the story of what happened to me in high school, secondary school. Of course, I went to high school in the United States. And in high school, there's certain courses you must take. You must take literature classes. 1 year is English literature. The next year is British literature. So I read all the novels that were assigned, all of them classics. I took tests on them. I passed the tests. I don't remember a single novel that I read for class. Not one. There must have been Shakespeare there. I don't remember. The novels I read on my own, I remember every single one of them. I read mostly science fiction and baseball stories. I must tell you about baseball. I assume some of you speak baseball fairly well. I can tell you a little bit about it. When I was 12 years old, I read my first book about baseball, written by a man named John R. Tunis. It was called The Kid from Tompkinsville. One reviewer talked about it and said, "It is the boy's book of Job. It's about success and failure and failure and failure and coming back again and again." I read it when I was 12. I read it again when I was college age. I stayed at my cousin's house and her son had a copy. I reread it. I read it again when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in my 20s. I was in Ethiopia. I found this bookstore that had the book. I read it again. And I read it again a few months ago. My doctor is at Kaiser Medical Center. He retired about 6 months ago. And I ran into him. He said, "You know, I'd like to keep meeting with you. We have a lot of mutual interests. Let's do coffee." That's the second ultimate compliment. The first one is getting an honorary doctorate. The second one is when your doctor wants to hang out with you. So his name is Seymour. We switched to first names. Seymour and I met for a whole year before the pandemic. Now we meet on Zoom. We reread all of John R. Tunis, all of them, and discussed them at a coffee shop about twice a month. We're planning to start doing this again on Zoom once I figure out how to set it up, etc. The books are wonderful. Now, you understand a little baseball? Is that true? Let me give you an example. This book is not just about success and failure. In one of the novels called The Keystone Kid, the new manager of this baseball team is giving a lecture to his players. The manager's only 25 years old. They don't respect him. But he says these wonderful things. He says, if you're the catcher and the hitter hits the ball, runs to first base, run behind him. You don't know. The person throwing the ball to first base may throw it wild. He may not catch it. You have to be there to catch the ball. 1,000 times they won't need you. But that one time, you must be there. This is be impeccable in your life. Do everything perfectly. Nobody's going to notice, but that's what you're supposed to do. I have thought of that example so many times. So these so-called light novels are fascinating. Another area I would like to recommend to you, which I've started looking at in Spanish, comic books. You know about comic books? I have the reputation, you should know how wonderful I am. If you don't know, I'm going to tell you. My reputation is I am considered the world's greatest expert, the #1 expert on comic book research. The reason this is true is that I'm the only comic book researcher. So I'm, of course, #1, okay? And I've been reading comics for years, and we've published studies on comics. We know that people who read comic books read more in general. If you bring comics in the library and let them sit there, Children want to read them. They'll read more comics. They'll take more books out. Comics are wonderful. They're also literature. Today's comic books are changing. It's no longer the old Superman. It's no longer Dick and Jane and silly stories. It's now literature. The person who changed the world is a man named Stan Lee, who started the Marvel comic book company. The major person, Spider-Man. I must tell you a little bit about Spider-Man. Spider-Man has become probably the most important figure in American literature. Spider-Man has problems. I'll tell you about them. Well, as you know, Spider-Man got his superpowers by being bitten by a radioactive spider, and that gave him the ability to climb walls and, and jump big heights and all this stuff and super strength. In this comic book, which is Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, issue 102, 1985, he sees an accident. A young lady is hurt. She's badly hurt. And he goes to the hospital with her. He goes in his real life persona as Peter Parker. She's been badly hurt. She needs a kidney transplant, and she needs it right away, or she's going to die. He goes looking for a close relative. He discovers she has a twin brother. Not as close as you'd like. If they were identical, it'd be better, but good enough. He finds the twin brother. He finds him on the roof of a building. Now remember, this is a story for kids, not for adults, and it works. He finds him on the roof. He climbs, Spider-Man on the roof. He calls him out. He says, Donnie. Donnie looks back now. Spider-Man wants him not to jump. He can't use his web shooter because he's too far away. He has to talk to him. Donnie, he says, Donnie, don't jump. Don't jump. It's obvious he's going to commit suicide. This is a story for kids, remember. Donnie says, I'm going to jump and you can't stop me. I've got problems. Problems I just can't face. Besides, what do you know about problems? You're a superhero. You don't have problems. And Spider-Man says, in words that will live forever, in comic book research, do you think life is easy behind this mask? You think because I'm a superhero, I don't have problems? And Spider-Man thinks of his problems. He thinks of his uncle who died, and he blames himself for not catching the bad guy before it happened. Girlfriend problems all the time. He's broken up and come back together with Mary Jane, gosh, probably 100 times. He works for a newspaper as Peter Parker. He's a photographer. He's paid by the picture, not a regular. This is like being an adjunct in a university. It's horrible, okay? And he thinks of his problems. And he says, Donnie, life is problems. Is problems for all of us, all the time, nonstop. True or not true? That's life. And we grow by facing our problems and trying to solve them, not by running away. Besides, if you jump, you're killing your sister as well. Donnie comes down from the ledge. He says, okay, for my sister. They go to the hospital. The operation's a success. They're leaving the hospital. Peter Parker's leaving the hospital, and the bubbles over his head. He's thinking, this turned out okay. But Donnie's still depressed, and there's not much I can do about that. You can't solve everybody's problems. This is a lot in a comic book, and it does very well. Those of you who are concerned about academic literacy, let me at least make a parting statement that the novels have been analyzed for academic words, academic language. They're full of it. My colleague, Jeff McQuillan, has calculated if you read the first 7 books, the 7 books in the Harry Potter series, you have a good chance of acquiring half of the academic words on known lists that students are supposed to know. So this is there too. I want to conclude by talking about a new vocabulary word I learned from somebody else. And it's called undertow. Alfie Kohn used this word, raging genius. The undertow of direct instruction. We all feel it. We feel the pressure of conscious learning. It's so hard to give up. We learn the pleasure of conscious monitoring. It feels good. When I monitor and I can think of the rule and make the subject and the verb agree, I rekindle the victory of having learned the rule. But normal people get their pleasures elsewhere. We are not normal. We are grammar fanatics. I went into language teaching because I loved grammar. It's taking me years to get over it. Also, one time not long ago, I was reading a graded reader, which was quite easy. It was actually too easy. And graded readers come with dictionaries in the back. And I knew all the words. It was really simple. But I looked up the words just to make sure. I was curious. What a complete, total waste of time. If I kept reading, I would pick up the whole meaning. At the same time, I was reading Zorro. I couldn't look in a dictionary because it didn't come with a dictionary. I am sure I gained more vocabulary reading Zorro. We have the struggle of overcoming the undertow. We are a special population. The way to overcome it is compelling, comprehensible input. Well, I hope we have time for some questions and discussion. Do we have time to do this? Or are we done?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll look in the chat box. Maybe that'll do it. No, not there yet. So can someone ask a question and I will give a brilliant answer? How's that? Okay, the first question. Okay, I've got the first question. I'm making them. I'm just asking the ones I want you to ask. What is preventing us from doing this? Why aren't people doing this in all their classes? Dr. Krashen, you're an old man. You've been doing this for years and years. You've been doing this for 45 years. How long does it take? Why aren't people doing this? Well, good question. I'm glad you asked. There are 3 reasons why we're not doing this. And we can solve them, but it isn't that easy solving them. Number 1, how do you find out? How do you find out about comprehensible input and pleasure reading? You can't. There's no place you can look. The articles that write about it are hidden in academic journals and in expensive textbooks. They're not there for the average person. Now, if you can find them, they're not there. But even if you can find them, there are problems. They're all much too long. They're written by academics who are trying to show off how much they know. People are publishing chapters of their dissertations in professional journals. I review papers for journals all the time. I think it's an obligation. I like doing it. But I told them about 5 years ago, I won't review papers that are longer than 5 pages. Since that time, I have not reviewed a single paper because they're all much too long. I don't have enough hours in the day. I can't do it. I ordered a paper once from the journal Nature about the double helix because it was written by the inventors, Crick and Watson. They wrote it themselves. And it looked short, so I ordered it. As download, it was free, open access. Totally comprehensible. I remember maybe half of my high school biology. That was enough. They made it so clear, and their conclusion. Good authors don't do this. They give a short conclusion. They don't tell you how you should be doing your own research. And they don't have a long introduction. If you need a long introduction, you shouldn't read the article. So the answer is short, short, short articles. So they're hard to find and they're too long. The third problem is they're expensive. I cannot afford to subscribe to journals anymore. I don't have the money. I don't know anyone who can afford these journals. The journals are now 75 American dollars, 100 American dollars. I can't afford this because I need to read them all. I look at so many journals. I can't. I found a few places where I can download and cheat a little bit, but not everyone knows how to do that. It's very hard and it's still too long. The answer is what is called, talking about revolution, open access. We must move to open access. A British mathematician who works in algebraic geometry, my son and daughter-in-law are mathematicians, told me about him. The libraries the academic libraries in Great Britain don't order journals anymore because now they're all open access. Isn't that wonderful? It's starting to happen here. I do not publish in the regular journals anymore. I publish only in open access journals. I announce the new publications on Twitter, and I'm trying to put them together on a website. I advertise them on Twitter, and I'm working toward making my articles all very easy to find. Jeff McQuillan does this. Beniko Mason does this. My colleagues do this, and we will change the world. I think this is the only way. Otherwise, our profession is dead. We cannot continue like this. I cannot be a scholar under the current conditions. I would have to retire tomorrow because I can't read current research. I can't afford it. So I depend largely on open access and occasionally getting a captive, a hidden article somewhere, but I don't want to do that. The only solution, captive open access. The good example too is the vaccine that everybody is using now, the coronavirus vaccine. This is working in the United States because it's free. The government has understood that we have to pay attention to the common good, for the good of everybody. I am not an enemy of capitalism. I'm a friend of capitalism. I believe in ethical capitalism. Capitalism where both sides win, then you can make money, but some things must be free, including most of education and access to research. Okay, that was a great question. Thank you for asking. I'll now move to the second one. Algo más.
Adelante, Doctor Álvaro Ramírez.
Hi, Dr. Krashen. Thank you for the excellent talk, very illuminating. I understand your argument about the greater readers, using them in the classroom. I think it's a great idea. But it's not clear to me, perhaps I didn't pay enough attention there, where do you have a transition? Is there a transition then from those greater readers to get to the literature that is more complicated? Because obviously in Spanish classes, at least for me, I'm in that field, no? We do have to transition from that easy reading, is the one where you get all that input, into the literature that we want students to get to, no? Because those are our upper division courses. So how do we transition? How do you transition from those greater readers to the more complicated literature? And at what point along the spectrum of lower division, intermediate, upper division, where do you see that happening, that transitioning, where we leave the greater readers behind, where we expect the students to leave the greater reader behind and go on? Or do they always continue with the greater reader?
Well, you can always continue as well. You read both.
Yeah.
But let me say something to you, Professor Ramirez. You have identified a very important gap that has not been discussed enough. And I am with you 100% because I'm exactly at that stage. Mm-hmm. I'm going to depend on Professor Villarma to help me with this. What are some novels I can read that are interesting to me, that are reasonably comprehensible? And your recommendations, experienced teachers' recommendations, are very important. So you are the solution to this problem. I am not, because I don't know what's there. I'll tell you what happened to me when I was in Vienna. Gosh, this is 1962, before all of you were born. Oh my gosh. I went to Vienna as a music student, as a pianist, okay? what happened was I didn't do very well with music, but I did great with German, and that changed my life. And it was a wonderful experience. I went to Germany. In those days, English was not everywhere. In those days, if I want to talk to someone, it was German. The students used German with each other. And we had a very good group of foreign student friendship group with native speakers entering all the time. Native speakers who thought we were interesting people. Isn't that nice? And who liked us. And we told each other what exactly the answer to your question. They said, you want to start with a good reader that's real German? Try Heinrich Böll. It's really good. It's fairly easy. You'll understand it. And here's some others. We gave each other what I hope you guys are going to give the profession. Recommendations of comprehensible, authentic readers that will bring you to the next step in your path. Thank you for asking the question and allowing me to ask for everybody's help in this. It's a real gap, right? You have reduced suffering. Good.
Thanks. We have another question. Gail?
Thank you. Steve, yes, of course, you can look for recommendations. There will be no spiders involved and there will be no cartoons. But yes, I will. Absolutely. And your remark about all of us finding the answer for you takes me to when I was a graduate student and called you in 1980, and you took the call and you smacked me down with the same answer that I was to find the answer in my teaching practice. So 40 years later, it's the same story.
40 years later. So, ladies and gentlemen, Gail was only 7 years old when this happened.
Yeah, I was a child prodigy.
Yes.
No, I do have a question for you, though. And it's something that I ask students each semester, because in the case of textbooks, they're obviously available in multiple formats. Electronically, they're available in hardcover, paper, and loose leaf. For getting textbooks, what are your thoughts about reading electronically, either on like a Fire with colors and, you know, whatnot, or, you know, a simple Kindle, or perhaps even the phone?
Well, let me tell you what my daughter told me yesterday.
Okay.
I noticed there was a Kindle on my desk. She said, Dad, do you use this? I said, no, I don't know what to do with it. She said, Dad, get with it. This is fantastic. You've got to do this. So my daughter's going to show me how wonderful it is this week. I am just an old, rigid thinking guy. You're absolutely right. We've got to try it out and see if we like it. And the idea that you can walk around with a Kindle with 500 books in it is just amazing. So
Okay.
yes, and yes. It's just that I'm just slow, okay?
For me, that was the selling point, that I could put more books on a Kindle, especially for travel, than I could possibly read during the duration of a trip. So, okay. Reading
Well, I
it.
don't plan to travel anymore anyway, but still, I'm never going to leave the house, in fact. This is great.
Great, thank you.
Good, we're making progress today. This is great questions. Good.
Muchas gracias al doctorado honoris causa Stephen David Krashen por esta interesante conferencia. Muchas gracias, doctor Stephen.
Ok, mucho gusto. Primera vez yo voy a hacerlo en español. No. Vamos a ver.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias al claustro académico de la Universidad Internacional.
Una vez, yes.
Gracias a todos por su asistencia al primer día de este Congreso Internacional Latinoamérica, y los esperamos el día de mañana, viernes 30 de julio, a las 9 de la mañana, hora Pacífico, y a las 11 de la mañana, hora Centro. Muchas gracias a todos por su asistencia y muy buenas noches aquí en Cuernavaca, Morelos, México.
Okay.
Dr.
Thank you very
Krashen,
much, Stephen.
it's my pleasure to invite you to study Spanish with us anytime that is possible for you.
Okay.
Now, or
Tomorrow morning at
You're
6
welcome.
o'clock.
You are welcome.
Very
without-
nice. Thank you. Beautiful.
Now, Dr. Krashen, thank
Thank
you.
you very
for your
much.
time.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you for this wonderful
uh,
invitation.
It's Gail and I, if you take us back to USC, me and Gail, when you're talking, many of what you're saying, it takes us back to that campus when we were grad students.
Oh, gosh.
Already in awe of you at that time. And we continue to be in awe of you. It's a great honor. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for delivering this great speech for us. We will always be grateful to you for that, and for all that other knowledge that you imparted to Gail and me, and for pushing us in the right direction to find our own answers. For all of that, we're grateful.
My pleasure. For once in my life, I am speechless.
Oh, yes.
Duly noted.
Right.
I thank Alvaro for inviting you, Steve. It's hopefully renewed a relationship that will turn out to be very fruitful, even if it's virtual, since you refuse to leave your living room.
This is a great staying home. I can't help it. Okay. Okay.
Well,
Great pleasure.
well, next time we'll see you in Taper Hall.
Taper Hall.
Next time we'll see you in
I
Taper
never
Hall,
come back to
USD.
USC,
Okay. All right, Dr. Krashen, have a really good afternoon, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay.
Adios.
Nos vemos, amigos.